We are joined by Erik Noonan today, who will be our presenter. He represents We Bike Rochester as their communications director. Erik is also a League of American Bicyclist certified smart cyclist. He's a software engineer, and in this past year, won the Mayor's Medal of Honor for Sustainability. Thank you, Erik, for joining us here today. He will be presenting on commuting by bike. So we'll be talking about bike commuting from his own experiences, biking to work to avoid car expenses and traffic congestion, to the environmental and health implications of transitioning more people away from a car-centric lifestyle. Erik will cover the whys and hows of getting to and from work by bicycle. And we will have time at the end today for some question and answer. So please feel free to leave any questions that you have in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to get to those after. All right, Erik, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. So hey, everyone. As Lauren alluded to, my name is Erik Noonan, and here kind of on behalf of We Bike Rochester, we'll be talking about bike commuting, how to do it, kind of what to expect. Yeah, I'm going to be covering kind of my own bike story, why I and other people bike commute, how to bike commute, and then talking about kind of the sustainability of bikes as transportation before we open up for kind of any audience questions. So bikes are just, toys for kids, right? So I, like a lot of Americans, started biking as a kid, but I also started bike commuting while I was a teenager. I had a after-school job. I worked at a hardware store that was about 4 miles from my house, and I really did not enjoy driving. I didn't end up actually getting my license until I went to college. And kind of a lot of that, there's a lot of reasons there. It's not enjoying it. It wasn't something I was felt comfortable with, but also where I lived, I could really get to most things that I needed at that age by bike, or by kind of relying on friends for, to ride share essentially. And that continued through college. I had kind of after school jobs through college, and this was, in St. Paul. So kind of that was when I kind of started experiencing winter bike commuting, and it really allowed me to kind of pinch pennies a little bit, not having to own a car, not having to pay for storage at that university, and this was, I was doing a real bare bones. I had a kind of just a beater of a mountain bike that I could let get rusty from the kind of road salt and stuff. And today's call, I really won't be talking as much about winter commuting, which is really its own topic. Maybe we can have another future call on something like that. But after college, I had about just shy of $15,000 of student debt, and I was really committed to trying to pay that off as quickly as possible. And I was able to do that in about 8 months, in part because I was commuting to work by bike, and I was living at my parents' house at the time, so I was really able to kind of maximize my those personal savings. But again, I was able to pay off my student debt kind of far ahead of a lot of my other peers, which really set me off on kind of a great financial footing in my early 20s. When I did move out of my parents' house, I was living in South Minneapolis, and I was commuting to an office in Eden Prairie, which is a nearby suburb. And there was this afternoon that I was driving. I was on 62, for those of you familiar with it, which is a crossing highway. And there was normally in the afternoon, like a 45-minute commute. And that day I was watching kind of the time estimate on my phone, on my GPS, kind of tick up, 50 minutes, 60 minutes. And it ended up taking almost an hour and a half to get home that afternoon. And I was so frustrated because there's, all of the, evening free time was gone. And I looked up at that point. I was like, well, how long would it take me to commute by bike if I was going to do that afternoon? And it was right around 40 minutes. So it's about the same as what it would normally be. And that's what I started doing it then. I kind of tied with that too. So I was working for Concur Technologies, which I know a lot of people might be familiar with. I think the city might use them, but Mayo definitely does. And they had a sort of an incentive program, kind of a corporate health program, where they would give gift cards to anyone who would bike commute a certain number of times. And that was like $20-30 back in 2014, every 2 weeks that they were giving it. So that was essentially paying for my groceries, which was, again, little cost savings here and there. And it ended up being enough of a time savings that I started teaching kind of high school students computer coding as an after work job, because of that time that was freed up from not having to deal with that work commute by car. My wife ended up doing residency in San Antonio. For those of you who have experienced kind of the larger cities in Texas, they tend to be quite a bit more wide than they are tall. San Antonio itself is about the same land mass or land area as LA County, but it has such a low population density that it can barely kind of support a bike or a bus network. And down there, I really don't like driving, especially down there. Cars are much larger. I think that the drivers are a little more aggressive. And so I still continued to kind of commute by bike whenever I could. And we chose an area of town that was a little bit more central. And there, most of the bike paths are along their river system. So it's really lush, especially for someone having grown up in Minnesota. I think that the novelty of kind of passing a riverbank that was entirely covered in rosemary never truly went away. So it's kind of a pleasant surprise to come around a corner and smell that. And I did that, all summer long down there with kind of the air temps, what they get to. And you realize that, even when you're midsummer in a place like San Antonio, the commute times that, the morning commute, especially, the temperatures aren't as much of a concern as you would think. It's a little bit cooler still, and you can get to work without, ending up too sweaty from that ambient heat. And then the kind of commute home, you hop in the shower afterwards. While I was living in San Antonio, I transitioned to being a freelance software engineer. And so it became work from home. But what I found was I'm really unproductive if I work from home full time. So I ended up replacing that work from home office with a series of coffee shops, and then sometimes breweries. It's kind of a office out of office. And so I still sort of had a work commute, but I definitely got to set the distance, which obviously it changes some things, but I think that sort of hybrid model is becoming more common for a lot of people. And as we started preparing to move from San Antonio to Rochester, I definitely was looking at it. This was back in 2020. We were going to have to move cross country, and we were looking at this car, and it's like, I have not used this car very often. And used car prices, there was definitely a seller's market at the time. I ended up selling this car for almost as much as I bought it for 7 years earlier. And I turned around and used about $1,000 of that to buy a winter bike, so I could bike all year round up here. So why do people bike commute? I think I went over a few of the reasons for myself, and I kind of summarized those. And I'd say that they're true for a lot of people. I think that the cost savings is a big component of it. Avoiding traffic, and a lot of that is the stress of it, is true for a lot of people as well. The health component is a big one. And sustainability is definitely top of mind for me. What's interesting with sustainability is when you see polling from kind of what are broadly considered like the most bikeable countries in the world, like the Netherlands, sustainability actually rarely kind of tops or breaks the top 5 for them. And it ends up being much more kind of about that sense of community and the health, and as well as the cost savings of their, especially kind of the car ownership is a much more, there's a larger financial barrier to it. So speaking of those cost savings, so cars are not getting cheaper. I think that this is probably something a lot of people on this call are aware of, but maybe not to the extent that it has become a really big barrier for a lot of people. As of last August, for the AAA, the annual cost of car ownership in the US was $12,000. So if you compare that to the kind of median income in the country, which is just over $30,000, that is a substantial portion of kind of everyone's paycheck that is going towards having this transportation cost. And where that's stemming from is that I think a lot of the car manufacturers have realized that those more expensive vehicles are higher price, they have the higher profit margin for them, and that has resulted in the average purchase price of a new vehicle. It's at $48,000 now, which is actually down from where it was 2 years ago, but it's a pretty astronomical cost. And what that results in is really high car payments. 1 in 6 Americans is paying over $1,000 a month, just for that car payment, not including any of the other costs, gas, maintenance, storage, anything like that. Traffic avoidance. So I kind of touched on this one. This one's kind of the big turning moment for me back 2014 was you spend a lot of time in a car. And I like audiobooks a lot, and you can crush a lot of audiobooks and both a car commute, but also a bike commute. And the average American spending 51 hours a year, just stuck in traffic. And what that kind of gets to is, and this was true pre-pandemic, was that the roadways in most of our major metropolitan cities are at capacity. And that, they had a dip 2020, 2021, and 22, but they're back. It's at about 90% of what it was pre-pandemic. And that gets to this topic of induced demand, which is it's pretty well studied. This idea that you can never build more lanes to keep up with the demand curve. Usually, if you build lanes within 3 years, the demand and the capacity, the demand for that will be outstripped by the supply. And so it really makes you have to look at kind of other options. And this is really evident if you kind of look at the extreme examples. The Katy Freeway, which is a freeway in Houston that has 23 lanes in both directions, can carry fewer people per hour than somewhere like the Champs-Élysées in Paris, which is a 4-lane with bus lanes, bike cycle tracks, and then pretty wide sidewalks. So it really kind of begs the question, like, is there this better approach that can deal with bigger capacity because population is not decreasing, right? So the health component, obviously kind of present in the mind of many, given our major employer here in Rochester. The way that I sometimes frame this is, if you told someone that there was a pill you could take that would, it's about a 45% reduction in heart disease, but overall, a 41% reduction in death by all causes, that would seem like kind of a no-brainer to take, right? Well, that's what it is for bike commuting versus commuting by other means. This was from a study that was done in the UK. It had about 200,000 people that they were looking at. That was done through kind of their socialized medicine program, their national health program rather. But really kind of strong data, and it's stands to reason. Usually, kind of the impacts of sedentary lifestyle in any situation has negative health outcomes, and so kind of being able to fitness in a way that just feels normalized. You have to go to work anyways. Is a great way to kind of encourage people to overcome that barrier. Also tied in with this one, globally, healthcare emissions, it lands at 4.5%, right about. And if we can kind of reduce the need for that healthcare, that's has big kind of individual and societal ramifications in terms of kind of our overall healthcare emissions. Bikes also, it's a very low strain, low impact form of fitness. I routinely in town here go on bike rides with people who, late 70s, early 80s, and all the way down to there's an 8-year-old that is a kid of a friend of mine who regularly attends these social rides. So it's a pretty accessible, form of transportation and also fitness. And kind of the other aspect of this one too is traffic casualties. So every year in the U.S., around 41,000 people die of car crashes, and that if you do the math on that, it's about 17 people a day, which is a pretty high number, and that's people dying, right? That's not just people who are having to be hospitalized. So kind of again going back to the healthcare implications of how can we reduce some of that need? Well, if you get hit by a bike, you're probably less likely to end up seriously hospitalized as compared to kind of the average cars that are being sold these days. So sustainability, kind of the overarching theme of this meeting series. The transportation emissions statewide in Minnesota, it's about 27% of our statewide emissions. And that number has unfortunately increased despite kind of efficiency improvements in automobiles and sorry, within that transportation emissions too. Most of that's coming from SUVs and trucks. And the efficiency increases for internal combustion engines that we've seen over the last decade have unfortunately mostly been offset by increased vehicle size. So obviously kind of trying to move again away from that, or encourage other people to move away from that. That trend line ends up being pretty important in terms of kind of overall emissions reductions. And with that too, a lot of people don't realize. So when you think of emissions from a car, you think of the tailpipe, but actually, for most vehicles that are on the road right now, more emissions are coming from particulate emissions are coming from the tires, and so, just kind of tell you when you talk about EVs, the EVs are an essential part of kind of this climate solution in a lot of ways. And we're going to have cars for, at least the foreseeable future. And it would be better if they were electric, but the kind of the impact and the emissions from them are still present, even if they don't have a tailpipe. And then kind of, I think the bigger impact of kind of this, the emissions from cars is really what it causes our built environment to end up like. So this image on the left here, this map of the Eastern Seaboard, if you kind of look at that, and this is per household emissions, the households that are more centrally located, much lower emissions than kind of the surrounding suburbs. And if you think of what's causing that, well, it's things like you're more likely to drive if everything is a little bit further away. And you're more likely to, make larger purchases if you have a larger vehicle, right? Like you're going to fill up the basket at Costco much more readily than you would if you were having to bike all that home in like a bike trailer or something like that. And it really gets to this idea of this infill development, which is kind of finding spaces within an existing city to find more, more housing. So maybe that's, space in between two houses, or converting, unused garages or sheds into housing, or just upscale, upzoning. Existing houses. So creating two townhouses where there was previously maybe one single family house. And the biggest kind of pushback on that always comes from, but where will the cars fit? Well, if you build out that environment right, hopefully you're less, you don't need those cars as much. And bikes can kind of be the stand-in for a lot of those needs.
Erik, we had a question on that last slide.
Yeah.
For the point about the tire emissions. Just a clarification, is that from the manufacturing and transport, or the deterioration and breakdown, or how you might recycle or not recycle tires?
Yeah, so unfortunately that's it's coming from the actual usage. So that's braking, that's acceleration. And again, when you kind of compare it to electric vehicles, much heavier. I own one. I own a small SUV. It weighs as much as the internal combustion engine F-150, and it can accelerate quite a bit faster too. So the ramifications of that one and the particulate that's coming from it, and that's it's ending up in our air, but it's also ending up in our waterways. And this is something that's kind of been studied a lot on the West Coast in terms of, I can't remember what the chemical is, but there's something that's used in the vulcanization process that makes the tires last longer, but it has really bad implications for fish, specifically out there. Blanking what the term is, the tentpole species or something like that. But for a salmon, it results in the salmon basically dying in the water because they can't get oxygen. And that's ecosystem wide has really bad implications for it. And they're currently trying to find if there's a chemical that they can use instead of that, but so far there's no kind of good options for it. So it's difficult to move away from kind of those car needs altogether. But I think that it's important that we try to reduce them for these kind of reasons. Was that a good answer for your question?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. Oop, that's not good. There we go. Cool. So how do you bike commute? Kind of talking about gear, starting out, locking up, and just broader conversation about barriers and solutions. So obviously for gear, you're going to need a bike. That's kind of the unavoidable one. And I'm a big proponent of the idea that if you're just trying out something new, that you really no one should go out and spend hundreds of dollars on some, on gear for it with the idea that maybe that will make them, actually try it or something like that. I always think about that in terms of like other fitness topics. Like, I'm going to spend all of this money on this fancy fitness watch, and that will make me go out and run. It's like, I'm sure it might help, but ultimately, you getting out and running, that's going to be the thing that gets you out running. And so with this, most people, if you own a bike, you probably own everything you need to bike commute most times in the year. Most of the bike commuting I've ever done, I did with just a backpack, and it was even when I was working Concur, it was the free one that I got when I first started working there. And the one in addition to that I always think is just this invaluable thing to have with you is a raincoat you can shove into that backpack. Not just for rain, but raincoats, in my experience, are this really great extra layer that make all of the difference in terms of you being too cold or not, and it's really it's a great flex layer. Pannier bags are also really great, especially in a place like Rochester where it's really windy like most of the time. To be able to put that weight and also the surface area down a little bit lower, it's a solid quality of life improvement. But again, that's the first kind of work pannier bag that I ever owned. I bought 2 years ago. So it's a really, and it's not a need, but it makes it's a quality of life improvement. And another gear that I definitely recommend, a simple fix kit. So that's a spare tube, kind of a small hand pump. Patch kits, they have a place in my opinion, but I think for work commuting, most of the time, if you pop a tire on the way to work, you don't really have the 20 minutes that it might take to get that the adhesive to really seal right. So it's a temporary solution, but ultimately you're going to want that tube. And then especially for work commuting, putting just a set of like latex or rubber gloves in there, so that you're not showing up to work to that client meeting with grease on your fingers is something that I've found pretty valuable. And anyone who's ever done commuted by bike is very familiar with the you show up at your destination, you're running a little late, so you're kind of biking a little bit faster than maybe you would have otherwise, and you're sweaty, and you run quick into the bathroom, grab paper towels, and try to towel off yourself. If you bring kind of just a cheap microfiber camping towel with you, you can kind of do that in the parking lot before you walk in, and tends to work a little bit better as well. And then front and rear lights. So here in Minnesota, obviously we live in a somewhat northern latitude or northern location, and it's dark when you commute in the morning, and often it's dark when you commute at night, especially right around daylight savings. That tends to mess with you a little bit, so that added safety of that. For Minnesota law too, that front light is required, but the rear light isn't required, but I would definitely recommend it. It increases your visibility quite a bit as compared to just a little reflector. For starting out, so planning your route. So We Bike put together, and this whole slide we can make available to everyone who would like it. It includes a link to this map that's on the left. But it's basically what would kind of a broader commuter route map look like from different areas of town to downtown. And I think it's a great resource for anyone who's looking to try this out. To base what their route will be on is to get onto kind of one of these bike corridors and go from there. If any of you need some help with that, definitely reach out to me or anyone else from We Bike, and we'd be happy to kind of figure out a route from your own home or maybe a park or a landmark that's near it to this trail system. Really important with this one that it'll sound like common sense, but a lot of people don't think of it until after the fact. Is once you figure out that route, ride it ahead of time and do it on a day off. When you're not kind of stressed about it and stressed about trying to make it to work on time. So you can figure out oh, hey, yeah, I know that there's this fork here, but I can't remember which way I'm supposed to go, or those sort of kind of little elements of it. And you can also figure out, Google will tell you often that a place like a roadway is a good place to bike. And then you get there and it's a very uncomfortable place to bike, and you much rather would have been maybe a couple streets over. So figuring that out ahead of time can be really beneficial. Finding ride buddies. So this is one, there's a lot of data actually to support this, and it's not just for bike commuting, it's for a lot of other fitness stuff. It almost serves as an accountability buddy, but also it just makes the experience a lot more fun to have kind of someone that you're maybe living near, or that most of that bike route that you take is the same, and maybe you grab coffee along the way. It makes social hour of the bike commute, as opposed to it just being you're riding to work and back. And I believe that this is a functionality that's on the Arrive Rochester app as well, or it will be soon. So if you're kind of looking to find someone else that maybe rides the same route that you're hoping to ride, definitely a good resource to use for that one. Change of clothes. There's definitely a speed that you can bike that is comfortable, where you won't end up being too sweaty most times of the year. And that is true for most people. Some people, like myself, are just kind of sweaty at baseline. And having a different shirt to throw on when you get to the place makes all of the difference. Some people will maybe once a week bring several changes of clothes to work if you have a place to change at your workplace, which I know is true of Mayo. And I think it's true of the city as well. But that change of clothes can, you can ride in whatever is comfortable to ride in, and then you get to work and you throw on your Mayo official suit, or whatever kind of your workplace attire is. And this is one too, it doesn't need to be the full outfit. I know from my own experience, and this is especially true kind of in the shoulder seasons and during winter, you don't want to bike to work in like dress shoes. And so, and I think this is true of a lot of people who drive to work as well, is you'll throw on like winter boots, and you'll keep kind of the nicer pair of shoes at your desk, or kind of in a locker at work, and change into those when you get there. And so it's kind of figuring out what the right balance of these options is for what your needs are. In general, for clothes, and also kind of the ride experience, wet is the enemy. Cold isn't the enemy. You can do a lot of things about cold. You can layer up, and most of the time too, you'll end up being too warm. The rule of thumb, especially on just a regular bike, is if you're a little bit cold when you start out, maybe for the first like 5 to 10 minutes, you'll probably be pretty comfortable for most of that ride. But as soon as you're wet, you're uncomfortable. So I think that the people who do make that the full commits to trying to do this on every day, even the days that are rainy or snowy, will end up gravitating towards having a pair of waterproof pants and waterproof shoes. As part of that, I recently got a pair of waterproof gloves because I had a bad experience of having my hands soaking wet inside of a different pair, and that was uncomfortable and kind of terrible. And I think that the final point with this one too is kind of, especially when you're starting out, like if you still own a car, you don't need to have this be something you do every day. If you're doing this for sustainability reasons, which I assume, given the kind of topic of this call, is maybe true of a lot of us, being a little bit better is better than not doing anything. And it's not a goal of being perfect and having zero emissions ever, right? It's just we need to all be doing a little bit better and making those changes to kind of decrease our own individual and collective impacts. Locking up. So this is kind of a big component of it that I think that a lot of people don't think of, especially if your exposure to riding bikes is maybe recreational, where maybe you're not even bringing a lock, or if you're just kind of, hey, I'm meeting friends at a coffee shop or something, where you're going to be in there for maybe an hour. It's a little bit of a different beast when you're locking up somewhere that you're not going to see your bike for 8+ hours. And in my experience, most bike theft tends to be kind of a crime of opportunity. And that's, no one's around in between these hours. And so if I need to, I can go up, if someone wants to, they can go up with a hacksaw or bolt cutters and take the time it might take to get through those locks. So the quality of locks ends up being a little bit more important. The way that you lock it ends up being a little bit more important. So I'm going to touch on those topics now. In general, the rule of thumb is you want to make sure that the most expensive components of your bike are the parts that are locked up. And so kind of in order of value, rear its frame is the most expensive, and the rear tire tends to be the second most, especially with the chain rings on that. And then the front tire is a nice plus if you can figure out a way to also have that locked. Kind of the image on the left, if you can see a small cable that's kind of looped through, that's looped up through that front tire. So it's, that one's really just a deterrent because the reality of all locks are not the same. The D-locks are kind of the gold standard. If you're going to be leaving a bike somewhere for 8 hours, that's what most people would recommend. Chain locks can be really nice. That's what I use here in Rochester because we are not a super high crime area. And it's a little bit more convenient to fit around different types of things I want to lock up to. And then, I really would advise people away from those cable locks. For anything that they're going to be leaving the bike there for a while, unless they really are okay with that bike potentially being stolen. Most of the time that I've ever seen kind of the post bike theft situation, there's usually one of those cable locks split up and on the ground, and that can be done with $40 bolt cutters you buy from a hardware store. With bike theft, if you do not register your bike, there is no way you will get it back. I think the kind of rule of thumb on that one that's more true than not. So on the bottom of your bicycle, there is a VIN number, and it's kind of the crankshaft on the bottom of that, which is at the base of kind of where all the stems come together. It's usually embossed or is this on a small laser engraved piece of metal, and that is a unique code. They don't have they're not standardized, so they'll be a different amount of numbers and letters. But take a picture of that. Get a friend to take a picture of you with your bike, and go to a website like this one. The Bike Index is the one that I use. There is a few different ones out there, but a lot of especially chain pawn shops or just places that sell used bikes will just have as corporate policy that when someone comes in with a used bike that they're hoping to pawn off, that they check one of these databases. And if it pops positive on that one that hey, this is someone's bike and they reported it stolen, they'll usually alert the cops. And I have heard stories of people who have had bikes stolen in Rochester, and that bike has been recovered in the Twin Cities, and RPD will go and collect that bike for you and bring it back to your home. It's quite a service. But in my experience, unless you've registered your bike, you're probably not going to see that bike again. And the final thing on kind of locking up, a lot of new bikes, especially below, I think a certain price point, the seat will have a what's called a quick release clamp. So like a C-shaped thing that you can pull and adjust the height. And those again kind of create that crime of opportunity. No one's going to sell that seat for much, but there's a lot of people who maybe the $5 to $15 are going to get from it or for it at a pawn shop. Maybe that makes it worth it to them, and it's obviously not a lot of effort. So if you replace that clamp with one that requires like a hex nut, a hex wrench to open, again, you reduce that possibility of that crime of opportunity. All right, and finally, I want to talk a little about e-bikes. I'm a big fan. The line I like to use on this one is that there's no silver bullet climate change solution, unfortunately, but I think that especially cargo e-bikes tend to be just about as close as we can get. Again, kind of going back to that 27% of state emissions coming from the transportation sector, and if you combine that kind of with within Rochester, and this is true kind of nationally as well, most trips, a little over 50% of trips, they're under 3 miles. Very doable on a bike, very doable on an e-bike, and the e-bike really allows you to go do that grocery run quite a bit better or quite a bit easier, and more people are able to do it. The math on it too, when you can kind of compare it to an internal combustion engine, which the good ones, they're getting close to 40, 50 mile gallon range on them. EVs, the good ones, are getting 130 mile per gallon equivalent. E-bikes, it's like 1,000, 4,000 miles per gallon. So it's really it's scales of magnitude, right? And when you compare it to something like the EV Hummer, the amount of batter, which is supposed to say battery, the amount of batteries that go into something like that, well, that one vehicle could be 380-ish, e-bike batteries. So in terms of kind of reducing the impact of that while still resulting in transportation options, the way that we use our resources matters. One of the interesting things with e-bikes too, so when people are polled on how far they do or are willing to bike, it usually comes around to like 3 to 5 miles for most people is kind of where they cap out. That jumps up to 8 to 10 for e-bikes for most people. And obviously there's super users who are going, far beyond that. But in terms of kind of, especially for a morning and evening commute, that those numbers tend to be pretty true. So, it creates this a very inclusive option for a lot of people. The big benefit, I think, for commuting as well is you're not showing up to work sweaty. You're not having to work as hard on it. But what's interesting is that most of the time, the people who end up getting an e-bike, they end up using it a lot more than they they did for their regular bike. And the total calories burned and those sorts of metrics ends up being higher on their e-bike because they're just using it more often. For clothing considerations for this one, so I'd mentioned for a regular bike, you kind of want to be a little bit cold at the beginning. And that's because you're going to be creating some body heat as you bike along to work. For e-bikes, that clothing consideration is a little bit less of a concern, to the point that I have friends who have used e-bikes through winter, and they end up having to kind of use what is normally for them like kind of a heavier winter coat and a motorcycle helmet. Even I've had friends using just to kind of keep warm enough on that if they are kind of relying on that e-assist feature. Now, the downside of e-bikes as compared to regular bikes is that they are more pricey. And this is something that I think there's a lot of kind of considerations with. Going back to kind of the idea of the average amount that Americans are spending on a car in a year, which again, that's a depreciating asset, right? So it's money that's going away, it's not coming back. This $12,000+ a year, you can pretty much buy, if you're looking over at the left here, I introduced these two different types of bikes. The top one is kind of a front loader. This is sometimes referred to as a bakfiets. This is a popular bike in Denmark and the Netherlands. And you can pretty much buy the nicest one on the market for right around $12,000. So like in terms of costs, you could buy and throw away one of these per year for about the same as most people are spending on a car in a year. Not saying that you should, but just as a price comparison. And also there's some really good data coming out on different municipalities and states that have done e-bike rebates. Denver had a pretty robust program, and kind of the results of that that are coming out is the people who got an e-bike through that program are using it 3 to 5 times a week, which is a pretty solid kind of vehicle miles traveled reduction. And there's some kind of awesome bills that are coming through, one at the state level here in Minnesota, and then there's one at the federal level that will hopefully also provide kind of more robust rebates to more folks, both statewide and also nationally.
Question in the chat on e-bikes and in the winter time, any tips on batteries with cold weather?
Yeah. So to my knowledge, they do get the range does get impacted a little bit, but the range on most e-bikes is like 40 to 60 miles, which is probably longer than most people want to bike in the winter. So in my experience and people that I know, that doesn't end up being as much of consideration. In terms of storage, I think that the best practice would probably not be to store that outside, but I don't know that one for sure. I do know that kind of biking through deeper snow, the torque required ends up, if you're really going out there in that fresh snowfall and trying to get to work on the day that the blizzard just happened and they haven't been able to clear any of the roads or paths or that kind of thing, that ends up being an issue that there's not enough torque to get through that. I don't know that that's maybe as much of a concern for kind of the average user. You'd probably be opting for a different transportation mode that day, or maybe making the sensible decision that to not go out on those roads. So that was kind of everything. We can go through the questions, and if other people have them, make sure you throw those in the chat.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I think we touched the couple of questions that came in during the presentation, so we'll open it up. If anyone has any additional questions, you can either unmute yourself and feel free to ask them or put them in the chat and I can address them as well. We did have go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Karen. I actually put them in the chat, but I'll mention them. When you went through the gear, you didn't mention a helmet. Shouldn't that be your first item of gear?
Yeah, the helmets are certainly important. Protecting your head your head's pretty valuable. I think there is some kind of robust discussion around kind of how much the helmet is like. The helmet will do a lot to protect you if you fall sideways off of your bike, but in the event of, say, a vehicle impact, it tends to not do as much as you would like it to. And so I personally tend to kind of de-emphasize that importance, because it's something that anytime that there is an impact, like the first thing that will be reported on or asked was that person wearing a helmet? And if they are impacted by, say, a F-150 pickup truck, unfortunately, that helmet's not going to do a lot. I do wear a helmet, and I definitely recommend that everyone does. In the winter, I actually find them really, I use a snowboarding helmet, which has insulation on the inside, and that keeps my head nice and toasty. And even on the shoulder seasons, kind of just a regular kind of lightweight winter, like a toque underneath a helmet ends up being kind of a great layer. So yeah, I think that helmets are important. I agree that they probably should have been on that list.
Can I ask one more question quick, or mention
Please,
one more
yeah.
thing? You mentioned when you first start commuting, you want to get a bike buddy. I've commuted my whole life, and I prefer to commute alone. It gives you mental time to switch from home to what's going to happen that day at work. At the end of the day, it's a great way to decompress. You can mentally switch from work to, oh, what are the kids? What do I have to do with the kids tonight? So I have never had a bike buddy, never wanted one, because I need that mental time. Okay. So I'm wondering if that would also help people.
For sure, yeah. I can speak. My own wife. That's when she leaves the hospital. That's something that she has really talked a lot about, how much she enjoys just having that time. And we chose a location where it's close enough that if she wants to, she can walk to work. But kind of the choice of the amount of mental time off, I guess, that mental the break for your brain is definitely a positive. And I can, there's definitely benefits to both. I think that a lot of people, when they're pulled, do prefer the comfort that comes from having someone doing it with you. But it's not true of everyone.
We have a question in the chat here. Are there accessible long distance transportation and hauling resources for folks in Rochester who bike commute and don't have a vehicle?
So are you talking kind of in terms of like getting up to the Twin Cities, or are you talking about if you're not wanting to bike within the city of Rochester?
Yeah,
I'm assuming, yeah, if you live outside the city, but maybe would still like to bike and work, live, play, shop in the city.
There are some regional buses. I'm not as familiar with that one. Is Matt, are you still on? You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm still on. Actually, yes, some more clarification, because I guess my mind actually was thinking to, like, you mentioned hauling resources, so I was thinking like, oh, like you need to, I don't know, haul a couch or something like that. So I was thinking like, some third parties such as like either U-Haul, or you can rent a truck for like an hour or two at like Menards or Home Depot. I don't know if that was in line with the question.
I guess like those are things that I've traditionally thought of, but they're just not accessible. Like those are very expensive, and you really have to work out the timing for it. Like it's not like an easy, like, oh shoot, something came up. Is there an additional resource? Especially, for friends who have kids, like they are just, it is not a thought for them to transition, or like even on a daily basis consider biking, just because they need that what if in a moment, got to go pick up a sick kid or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that where, in my opinion, Rochester is right now is that it's a great city for a lot of people to live car light, which might mean that they're a one car household where they still do have that vehicle available. What I see kind of happening nationwide in a lot of cities is as people kind of transition towards these for all the reason towards kind of decentering cars, I guess, as their primary means of transportation, that programs like Our Car, that those really become successful once you reach a certain threshold of people who are maybe not owning a car, or they have that flexibility with that. I know that Mayo has some vehicles as well available for folks who need to go to kind of satellite offices. I know people that don't own a car that just rely on kind of Mayo's fleet vehicles for that sort of thing. And then kind of to Matt's point about those times when you do need to haul a couch. I mean, I can't fit a couch in the car that we own. I would go and spend that $20 to rent Menards truck for an hour or whatever. But it kind of something that I didn't touch on in the e-bike slide was again this top one. It's a really great option for folks who do have 1, 2, 3 kids, where part of their work commute currently is dropping those kids off at school. And then they kind of ride the rest of that portion. So I think that for most of the time, the bikes are enough. Even if you kind of look at the statistics on pickup truck usage, most people with a pickup truck, they never use that bed all year round. I think it's like less than 1% of pickup truck owners use that more than once a year. But in terms of those offerings around town, I think that we could probably be doing better. And I think that as more people kind of transition away from this, every adult needs to own a personal vehicle, that we'll see a lot of those pop up.
All right, so we have some more questions in the chat here. This one might be Matt, but what's the status of getting more protected bike infrastructure installed in Rochester? Wasn't there a recently passed active transportation master plan by the city council?
Good question, Nick. You're right. There was a recently passed active transportation plan as of last November. And so that identified sort of system-wide improvements for bicycling and active transportation throughout the city. We recently went through an updated CIP process. And so it's a matter of budgeting for certain route improvements, and then come to the design phase, it's a matter of looking at each of those sort of corridors and designing them sort of street by street. I guess the first place that I would guide anyone interested is to that active transportation plan, looking at the sort of the 10 near-term gaps is the projects that we'll be looking at primarily for new facilities as they come up in the sort of the maintenance and reconstruction cycle that the city public works team sort of follows. And from there, looking at the needs of pedestrians and bicyclists along those corridors, and then hopefully, providing at least some sort of facility, whether or not fully protected is sort of dependent design of those projects.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, like so much of infrastructure happening is just, it's dependent on the funding being available. And kind of the current way that a lot of our infrastructure gets funded is in the form of highway funding, which creates kind of this inflexibility in terms of being able to use that for other things, mass transit and safe bikeways. So kind of changing those norms, which it is happening, kind of the big infrastructure package that was passed under the current administration, it is an improvement on that, and even statewide, having transit funding not be tied to kind of a year-by-year bonding bill is a big move in the right direction. But it really, as Matt said, it ends up being, we can add more when the rest of that road is, so beaten up that it needs to, be replaced. And at that point, we can kind of do better things with it that are better for more users.
Yeah,
All right.
you nailed it there. It kind of all comes down to funding and that budget cycle.
Any other
other questions?
questions?
Yeah, there's Nick posted a picture of him carrying a couch on his bike. For anyone that's worried about yeah. Can I swear on this call? There's in Portland, there's something called the carry shit Olympics, where they take cargo bikes and they try to carry kind of like large unwieldy objects as sort of competition. And I've seen people do whole house moves where they kind of get a bunch of people together with cargo bikes and they move
Interesting.
furniture and they move everything that they own. Yeah, so it's more doable in more cases than most people realize. But again, we're a long ways from ever not needing a option of either having a friend with a pickup truck or being able to go to Home Depot and rent one for an hour. I think that we're coming up on the end of the time as well. Thank you
Yeah.
all for joining. If you think of questions after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or anyone else at We Bike. Yeah.
Yes,
Have a
thank
great
you,
rest of your
Eric,
day.
for joining us today for your presentation. So everyone knows this week's sustainability series, or this month's, is helping to promote May, which is National Bike Month. We have Bike to Work Week, May 15th to the 21st, and Bike to Work Day is on Friday, May 19th. Keep an eye out for activities that the city will be hosting in coordination with We Bike Rochester and other partners. There will be rides and activities on Bike to Work Day, and then incentives through the Arrive Rochester app for Bike to Work Week if you participate that whole week. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next month for our May presenter.